Hello and welcome to the Wild Wild West podcast. My name is Richie Riche of the MHRT Network. You will note there are two people missing from the podcast right now. Alex regrettably cannot make it today. He is currently traveling and had a schedule conflict. So, unfortunately, that'll be one man down. We do believe Robert should be joining us shortly. Which is going to be great. However, obviously, some things do occasionally crop up. So here's hoping. Now, with regards to gentlemen over here, directly there on my right or left, depending on which way you are facing your screen, we have Mr. Jack Hanna representing his Las Vegas Raiders. Jack brings a tremendous amount of knowledge on the Raiders, insight, whatnot, and we'll be getting right into our teams, where we stand, where the division is, that kind of stuff. I do expect this to be a shorter podcast than typically, so this will be a good time for you guys to reclaim some time later in the evening once we're done here. But Jack, how are you doing today?
Hey, Richie, I'm doing good. How's everybody out there in the Wild Wild West?
Well, I know we're starting to get people streaming in here, so we'll get some folks in here. If you can go ahead and shout us out and say hello in the chat to let us know that you are actually paying attention, that you're not just an NPC, that'd be great. And also, any questions you have on the various AFC West teams would be fantastic for you to leave in the chat as well. And obviously, just some very brief housekeeping elements here. Down below in the description of the video, you will find links to the various channels. It does help us all out if you can go ahead and click the like button on each of those videos, as well as subscribe if you haven't. There's a fair number of you who are not subscribers to the channels that watch the show. Subscribing to each of our channels helps us a tremendous amount because it allows the YouTube algorithms to recognize the fact that people enjoy watching the show and care enough about the channels that they watch them on to go ahead and click that subscribe button. So if you can go ahead and click that, that would be wunderbar. We have a Joel, I would shout with the exclamation part there, and then an E at the end. I don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce it. I'm going to say Jolie, maybe, but we'll see. Thank you for joining us, Joel and Cool Kev. Always a pleasure having you on the show, my man. Any questions you may have on my Denver Broncos, or obviously for Jack with regards to your Las Vegas Raiders, go ahead and fire them in the chat. And if you have any questions with regards to the Chargers, I do believe Robert will be joining us shortly. So, Jack, just some quick news about the AFC West that has come out since our last podcast. Bugs has been cut from the Kansas City Chiefs. That would certainly be he has been a theme of our last 3 shows or so where he's come up, where various issues have come out. Now, there have been some recent updates that I do think are noteworthy to bring up with regards to the Kansas City Chiefs defensive tackle there. It sounds like, at least from the new news that I've heard recently, just earlier today, that some new news had come out with regards to those dogs that he had been charged with the animal cruelty with regards to. Assuming the information that I have heard is correct, the house that the dogs were at were his. However, the new news that has come out is that his agent and Bugs himself has indicated that the dogs were not. And I suspect, again, this is speculation, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I believe what we're likely going to find out is that somebody or friend of his had asked to stay at his place and brought dogs or whatever, and they were mistreated. So I suspect that that's kind of what took place here. But wait and see what happens. Wait and see the details as they're beginning to come out. As it stands right now, the other information that came out is that Bugs was not staying at that house where the dogs were found during the stretch of times that the dogs were there, apparently. And there's also some additional news where I don't know if he's part owner of something or if he has a business with someone, but it sounds like there's also a dispute within the city there that's involving him as well. That is aside from these other cases having to do with some kind of like a hookah lounge or something. But anyways, wait and see what happens there.
I think that's just kind of crazy. You know, if the guy's not even going to be home and dropping dogs off and leaving dogs, you know, it's, as we were kind of talking behind the scene, you know, my dogs are like my family. And to have a friend drop dogs off when the guy's not even going to be around and to take care of them, you think you would find somebody that would be around, take care of your animals.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm saying is that I suspect that I think the domestic issue at least is going to be at least given some of the information, perhaps a little bit more challenging for him to get away from, although we'll wait and see what information comes out there as well. But it does appear, at least on the surface, that the way that the dog and animal cruelty story was framed within the news reports that were coming out, it was that they were his dogs at his house and he himself was neglecting them. Assuming this new information is correct, it's sounding like the only thing that he will be found guilty of or kind of be on the hook for, whatever, you know, take your poison, take your pick and how you want to frame it, is it was his property that the dogs were found at. And I don't know what the laws or legislation is within the jurisdiction where those dogs were found. But if he can prove that it was reasonable for him to expect someone else to have both been there and taken care of their animals, not his, you know, I don't know what plea he'll end up with, but it's certainly not what it was originally made out to be within the media. Because in the media, I mean, we can all agree, it was certainly presented in such a way where, you know, any reasonable person at that point would have thought that, you know, he was abusing dogs.
Yeah.
Right. And now maybe it'll come out where this is misinformation and maybe he was. But at least on the surface, as it stands right now, the new information that seems to have come out from this gentleman's agent is that the dogs were not his and he was not at the house. Now we'll wait and see if he and or the police can prove that. But we'll wait and see it, you know, go from there. You just, you know, it's so important to ensure that you have all the information in these instances and scenarios before you paint a picture of someone. But it certainly is somewhat telling, at the very least, that the same guy, kind of like Rashid Rice, is caught up in 2-3 different instances within a very short period of time. It's just certainly not a good look.
No, it's definitely not a good look. And like within the chat, you know, yeah, like Kev said, it does remind you of Michael Vick, that's for sure.
Well, the animal cruelty thing does, and the question is that Bugs that reminds you of Michael Vick, or is this an associate of his, which would be indicative of almost the same, like it's almost deja vu, right? In the similar conversations we've had, which is when you enter into the NFL, do you have the right people around you? Are you surrounding yourself with folks that are looking out for your best interest, or are they looking out for their best interest because they see you as their meal ticket?
Facts.
Right. And so does this guy have a whole bunch of, you know, friends with their hands out that said, well, you made it now, bro. Now, you know, gimme. Or does he have, you know, himself surrounded with true friends, like real legitimate friendships here, where he's got 2 or 3 dudes or, you know, inner circle friends that are basically given permission to put him in his place and say, no, you're not doing that.
Well,
and
he needs to find those guys right there. That's for sure.
Right. Right. And then you look at Rashid Rice, for example, he could have very much used a friend with that as a mental mindset. Someone that was given the latitude to say, dude, you got a whole boatload of money coming your way. Let's not go street racing. Because if you're caught or we crash or whatever, you're done. It's not worth $15 million.
No.
And he needs people like that in his life. Obviously, Rashid Rice hopefully has realized that, although I'm not sure, but we'll see. But all these NFL players really do need to take a look at what's occurred here and make adjustments accordingly.
It's such a short window. So, I don't know if anyone watched The Rush when they had Howie Long on it, but Howie even said it himself. It's such a small window. You got to go in, get your job done, do it right, do it the right way, because you're only got so many years, and then you got the rest of your life.
Right.
And then you can do whatever you want, but yeah, to sit there and get guys that have talent and just kind of throw it away, and you're just not acting accordingly and not acting smart. You're right. They do need to surround themselves with the right type of folks. And you think the organizations would help out with that too.
Well, it's not only that, it's they need to surround themselves with people that are given permission by them to put them in their place to tell them no. And I think too many people get so complacent and want a bunch of their friends to simply just say, "You're the man, bro." Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And far too many of these guys are only willing to put those types of people around them, and it's obviously come back for many, actually many, not just one or two, many, to kind of bite them in the rear. DZ, the only information that has come out, and I say the only because it's certainly not fantastic, is that the dogs were malnourished and they were left on the porch for at least 2 days. Now, aside and above and beyond that, that's the only information that has at least been publicly disclosed at this point. It doesn't mention anything about physical abuse on the animals in terms of, like human to animal physical harm or anything like that. It does seem more likely that, I can speculate, but like I was saying, Jack, earlier in the show, it sounds an awful lot like a buddy of this guy's said, "I'm coming over with my dogs." And he said, "Cool. I'm not going to be there." And wasn't there, but then the guy didn't look after his dogs. And his buddy. And so I'm wondering if that may be what's occurred here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all this comes out and it shows out that, the information is just like an attempt to, make us look left when we should be looking right. But as the information comes out, we'll report it on the show. This is new information that's come out over the last 2 days, particularly from the 24th to today. And we'll see if additional clarity comes down the pipe in terms of both the domestic assault charge and this one, because both are, we'll just say, unflattering. Like, I think both are unflattering. Yeah. I have no other way of putting it. Both are very, very unflattering. So as we look forward to some of the chats here, there was a Denver Broncos question here from Cool Kev that I wanted to answer because I think that was a good one. Cool Kev, this is going to be an interesting offseason for my Denver Broncos. I have no other way of putting it. There is, and if you've heard me on the show, I have been consistent in this comment myself. I believe there is a reasonable chance that unless Javonte just blows the doors off and starts to look like he did in years past, there's a reasonable chance that he will be moved on from, as the preseason and cuts come. Maybe a team will throw a flyer 7th, believing that they can. Just in terms of what you're looking at, Javonte didn't look the same. He looked like he wasn't able to absorb the impacts like he was able to before. He had major, major trauma to his knee, which is in some regards to be expected when you have trauma like that to a knee. But you can't have a guy whose game is predicated on physicality not being able to be physical when he runs the ball. It's the equivalent of saying, hey, that NBA player whose game is completely built around throwing 3-point shots and had like a 60%, make rate or something on them. Well, yeah, he can't drop a 3 now to save his life, but he's still a good player, right? Well, the answer is no. The short answer is just no, is that you need him to return back to his old form. You need him to be back to that old physical style. And either that, or he needs to learn the elusiveness. He doesn't have either. He was built on physicality, and that's what kind of gave him that breakaway speed. Josh Jacobs, I'll tie it back to the Las Vegas Raiders there, has a fairly physical running style mixed with some elusiveness into the game as well. Javonte has never really had that elusiveness to his game, but he's always had the physical style. If Josh Jacobs, for example, lost the physical run style that he ran with and has had success with the Raiders, I don't think he'd be in the league very much longer past a year or two.
I can see that. But you did pick up a nice running back in the way of Estime, who's also a physical runner. And he's a big, thick kid, like the 220 or something like that, 5'10", out of Notre Dame. And I think you'll like the way he plays.
Right. And that's kind of why I think they got Estime, though. Look at what they saw from Javonte. He just couldn't do what he was able to do before. And at some point, you need to bring in the dude's replacement to force the guy to play. And say, you don't want your job to get taken by that guy? Go earn it. And the best teams always have someone, nipping at your heels, so to speak, to say, I'll drag you down and take your job.
You got to have that competition at every position every year. If you don't have it, then complacency happens.
Hold on.
I saw a question that Matt put out there. Salute Matt, salute Kev, salute all the guys. Do you think Ja'Cory Bedin or Faison will be the CB2, or do we get a free agent quarterback before camp? Initially, on that one, Matt, I was all about, I wanted Xavier Howard because we got $34 million in cap. But the more as time's kind of gone on, I think Bennett's got the upper hand right now over Faison. And plus we got Devonshire, and we also got so I think, I think as a whole, just that is probably the weak link on our. I think, we're probably solid enough to not go in that direction. I'm kind of hoping more of like the Raiders, re-signing, because we got a lot of guys on defense and they're in their last year of their contract. So I'm hoping they throw out some extensions to some of these guys.
The other thing to consider for your Las Vegas Raiders, Matt, is you have improved your defensive line. And what I mean by that is the interior elements of your defensive line. You have made moves to improve that area of your team. And when you have interior defensive line pressure that is good, I mean, you already have Crosby. This is not a secret that he's in the upper tier of the NFL when it comes to rushing the passer, particularly from the interior. However, you have at least one or two additional guys that are now complementary to Max Crosby. One has shown, we'll call it reasonable success last year. And you got a new guy there that can hopefully step in as well. So that will actually improve. I say all of that to kind of tie back to your question, which is you have several options there in your cornerback room. However, with better interior line pressure and more consistent interior defensive line play, your corners will need to cover for less time, and therefore a corner who you may not have been happy with last year may start to look better. However, don't let fool's gold fool you. The question then is he covering the guy for longer and therefore showing actual improvement? Or is your defensive line forcing him to cover for less time and therefore he's just looking better? The two are not equal. And as fans or fanalists, we need to dig into the differences between A and B. But I think it's a great question because cornerback too, and also your slot corner, and also your, I would say CB4, but your depth, like the guy that's after your starting three, for what is traditionally in today's NFL, the way you're going to largely play, which is three corners on the field. For the most part, I'm not saying exclusively, but for the most part, you're going to play with the three corners on the field. Who's that other guy? Who's the guy that's going to step in when inevitably one of your starters gets hurt? And you need four guys, typically one of them who's going to be developing and maybe starting soon. You need that other guy as well, but ultimately with a better D-line, they're all going to look better.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw the opposite. Raider Nation knows this. When they owned from the Rams players, like Littleton, he's playing behind Donald and he looked like an all-pro. And then he comes over to the Raiders and he's supposed to be one of the best cover linebackers, and we wanted him just for Kelsey, and he couldn't cover anything. So it makes a lot of sense. That was a good point.
Yeah, well, when you have a D lineman who demands or commands double teams every play, basically, in Aaron Donald, otherwise you'll get smoked. You're putting yourself in a position where your linebacker has got a lot more time. He doesn't have to focus on multiple assignments. He doesn't have to focus on one section of the field because he knows that D tackle, in this case Donald, has kind of got that area covered because the team is committing so many resources to him that he's going to draw them. And then he just has to focus on one section or one area, or doesn't have to pay attention to the secondary play because Donald is going to negate that secondary play just because of, cogging the hole or cogging the gap or making the gap too congested to allow for a proper play to kind of go to his side of the ball. And that's exactly what you're going to get with a guy like Donald. You're going to have a few. Chris Jones is another good example of that in our division.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He's another dude that, your linebacking play kind of gets adjusted when you have a guy like Chris Jones, right? And I think that's a big deal.
Helps everybody out. If you got that defensive front, it just gives everybody a little bit more time to get in the position where they need to be to make the plays.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can get more creative with your coverage units as well, where you can start shimmying guys around based on who they're playing. Whereas if you have guys that are not as great in the coverage game as, say, others are, you're then limited in what you can do in terms of where they can go. Like, for example, if you have a safety who is, say, tall and somewhat quick, you may want to say, hey, if Kelsey's looking like he's going to break out in the slot, I want you to cover him rather than the 5'10" corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side, if you got a short, quick, shifty dude or a speed receiver, you might start flipping guys around. But if you don't have to worry about the middle of the field, you can shift assignments around like that. You can have guys, tag off and whatnot, and not worry about ending up with the, self-pick plays, the ones where your own players kind of get in their way and then the guy kind of has that extra second to catch the ball. If you don't have to worry about that extra second mattering where they can kind of tag off and go, that puts you in a way better spot as a team. And I think with a better D line, which I do think the Raiders have definitely done this year, you're going to be in a better spot when it comes to your secondary play, so long as the other team struggles to block your defensive front.
I see that happening.
Yeah.
Basically, it's almost the same D line minus Tillery and then getting Christian Wilkerson, which is a definite upgrade. I think this is the first year. I think, a lot of Raider fans are really excited to see what this defense can do. Mm-hmm. Where it's been years, besides last year. The second half of last year, it's been years since having a really good one. So it's going to be a lot of fun for a lot of us to see how it develops and having a full year under our new head coach, who's a defensive guy himself. So this will be a lot of fun. And they added some good pieces in the draft too. So it's going to be all about, for us, it's all about the offense. It's what I see people talking about in the chat. It's about the quarterback play. Yes, it's all going to be based right there.
Well, I think the Raiders fans here were simply saying that I shouldn't be worrying about your corners. I should be worried about my Denver Broncos quarterback room. I'm not saying I'm not worried, but I'm also not going to say that I'm comfortable with it either. With regards to the Denver Broncos quarterback room, what I will say though is it is a not so well kept secret that my Denver Broncos had to completely simplify their playbook in order to accommodate Russ and the fact that he couldn't operate and command the line of scrimmage the way that Sean Payton's offense really requires in order to be successful. And so I think you started to see a glimmer of what it could look like when you saw Stidham in there. And it was just a little bit, you know what I mean? Like not all the way there, just a little bit. And I think similarly, if I'm going to again tie this into, because there's quite a number of Raiders fans who are in the chat here, so I can tie this over to what you guys had and saw last year with your Las Vegas Raiders. It is no different than the comments that I've heard from Raiders fans as it pertains to the McDaniels offense and how, you guys felt that it didn't suit the players that were on the field. And it wasn't as successful as you wanted it to be because it was either overly complex or it just wasn't working.
Well, and there's also, it's a very complex offense. And McDaniels has got such an ego to him. It's kind of what led up to the breakup with Derek Carr. One of his best things was able to audible into plays that would be more successful. And McDaniels is like, don't change the play. Just run what I give you. And you're never going to be successful if you always got one hand tied behind your back and you see something where, I can make this guy get open in this area based on what the defense is showing. And you're not allowed to do it. So, yeah. And the thing about Rust is I read an article today that he's not doing very well in Pittsburgh right now. So can't wait to hear your friend who's the Pittsburgh guy come on and talk about him over there.
My whole thing has been Russ has lost a step in terms of mobility, and he never gained or put the time in to do the processing component of the defenses. He's got a mental gap or block, in my opinion, of almost seeing pressure when there's not, or feeling pressure when there's not, and then therefore scrambling either way too early and putting himself in jeopardy, or he's got the other issue, which is just a bad combination, actually, if you're going to be honest, of I must see the guy open in order for me to throw the ball to the guy, not throw the guy open. Like, there's a difference between those two styles of play. And one of them often leads to either picks if you're too aggressive with it, or leads to quarterback sacks because you're not being aggressive enough with throwing the ball, because you're not throwing those anticipatory throws to get to the guy open in stride. You saw AOC4 make some of those anticipatory throws in some of those Raiders games where he was kind of throwing crossers and he'd lead the receiver so they would catch it when they were in stride and running. Was it Jacoby Myers is a great example of a wide receiver that seemed to have a connection there. To be quite honest, almost with any quarterback that threw him the ball, but certainly with AOC4, in my opinion, where they were able to do well. Like, they looked very much on the same page.
Well, that was the trust thing, and and they did perform very well together, and I think they did connect, which is exciting, especially when you're a 4th round draft pick, 3rd stringer, not expected to play, get thrown into the fire, and you don't have all that time to build that chemistry. So that was pretty impressive. And the thing with Russ, I just felt like he just didn't seem like he had to trust. I don't know if he didn't trust himself, trying to be too perfect, or if he just wasn't trusting the wide receivers that, were on your team. Because he didn't look like Russ. I mean, his numbers weren't bad. I mean, 28 touchdowns, 6 picks or something? Or no, 26 touchdowns, 8 picks, which isn't bad. But he just didn't look like the same guy. And I do believe he's lost a step. I agree with you 100% on that. He doesn't look like the same type of player he once was.
Right, but you have to look at what took place. At the beginning, he looked okay. Then he had a large stretch in the middle that he did. Sorry, he had a up and down stretch in the middle. And then he didn't look great near the end, and that's why he was eventually pulled. Is opposing teams started to see the cracks. Opposing teams started to see what was not working, and it was simple. He was not reading the defense that was put before him, and he was given a set of reads. If you were able to kind of take away read 1 and read 2, it left him spinning, because he was just spinning his tires trying to figure out where to throw the ball. And he wasn't willing to trust the anticipatory throw or the 50-50 balls or any of those sorts of things. He just wasn't, and it didn't work. It just did not work. His stats were good. Like, his actual stats were pretty good. Respectable even, right? But overall, you're not going to win football games with the way that he played. You're just not. And, similarly, I think the Raiders have a bit of a prove it year this year with AOC4 or 12, whichever one you call them now.
Well, yeah. I agree. It's going to be a prove it year. But, I think it's going to be a lot different. The culture on the Raiders team is different. And that's another thing that I like, what Howie Long said on The Rush is, like, he's seeing that culture change himself. And he's liking it. And I think every Raider fan is liking it. And AOC4 spent the whole offseason living at the facility with Max and some other guys that were out there. And to get a full spring training, training camp, and let him get in the first. Right now, he's the starter, so it's AP said it's his to lose. So you're going to get a lot more reps. So I'm hoping and I'm wanting to see continued improvement. How far that will go, no one will know, and just let the best quarterback in camp win it out.
I actually agree. I agree. I think this is going to be an interesting year, probably more for the Raiders than any other team in the division, with the exception of maybe the Broncos as well. But I think the Broncos are in a different spot. And I'm going to say that because the Broncos have either Stidham or Wilson, depending on who gets kept or whatever, which are your, throw them in, see what happens kind of quarterbacks. You're not really invested a tremendous amount into either of them. But then you drafted Nix. Now, to address the banter, Nutty Raider Nate, with regards to Bo Nix, I would prefer not to see Bo Nix play or start. I think I've been very clear on this from the get-go, which is I don't want Nix to start. I don't want Nix to start the year. I believe that the stats and the data from that is quite clear. There have been very few, if any, quarterbacks that have started their career as, from week one and won a Super Bowl. In fact, funnily enough, one of the last quarterbacks to do that was Russell Wilson. Because if you might recall, he was a later round draft pick, and they had just signed, I can't remember the QB on the Seahawks. Was it Hasselbeck?
We're talking about Raiders?
No, the Seahawks.
Oh my God, I don't even know who's on the Seahawks.
No, like back when Russ was drafted. Like Russ was drafted in like the third or fourth round, and he was never intended to start.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to think. I'm drawing mental blank.
And then
someone in Cattle Front, no.
Yeah, and then he had a bit of a flash in the pan when it came to the preseason. And then all the Seattle fans insisted and were pounding the table for him to start. And Pete Carroll went with his gut and started Russ over the highly paid quarterback. And then they moved on from the highly paid quarterback in the offseason, and Russ never gave up the reins.
Could have been Tim Hasselbeck. But remember, the Raiders picked up somebody that was also not that around that time. Only played like a year for us and stunk it up. Was gone.
But that's the whole point, right? Which is when you have to dig deep to find a guy that has started their year one and then actually gone on to win a Super Bowl. And you have to think about it really hard, and there's almost none that you can actually select from.
I don't think there is one.
Well, Russ started year one and won a Super Bowl in his career.
Well, that's because he came off the bench, though, didn't he? Or are you talking the next year? It wasn't the first year.
No, I'm not saying winning a Super Bowl in his first year. I don't think anyone has actually done that.
Yeah, I know.
My point is that even a quarterback that starts year one in their career, I cannot think of one aside from Russ who has actually won a Super Bowl. And Manning might be the other one that comes to mind as well. But the point is that you're talking a rare air scenario. And if you have to think as much as you are right now to say, hey, who's the dude that's done it? That's clearly not a good approach, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole point is as much as you'd like to think that your team is different and your coaching is so good and all this other nonsense, there's a reason why it hasn't worked. There's tremendous amount of incredible coaching at the NFL level. Arguably, you got guys like, Sean McVay, you've got Mike Tomlin, you've got a whole host of exceptional coaches at the NFL level. And none of them, even as good as they are, have been able to accomplish what Pete Carroll did with Russell Wilson in his career, which is recency bias, which is quarterback starting week one and in, the early or even in their career winning a Super Bowl after starting week one. Almost all other quarterbacks that have won Super Bowls in 20 years, the last 20 years at least, none of them started week one. They all sat behind somebody else. And in fact, a good number of other quarterbacks, even in, the generation prior to, the one that we're referring to here, which I would include, say, the Tom Brady, etc. Very few of even that generation prior to them started week one and actually then went on to win Super Bowls. Most of them sat behind a vet for a year or two and then were brought in. Even Aaron Rodgers, for example, who's currently playing now, sat a little bit.
And he sat multiple years behind Brett Favre.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then he has only won one Super Bowl. But I mean, I think there's a few reasons for that. I think that the defense really was, let him down, and they never drafted wide receiver talent when he needed it, that kind of stuff. But that's my point, is you need the quarterback to learn, you need them to develop. And just because the guy might look good, like a Joe Burrow, for example, when he was out there year one, who looked quite good as a rookie, there's still going to be 4 or 5 games where they are perplexed just because the NFL is played at such a different pace than they're used to from college, that it will, I'm not saying it's going to fully set them back, but it's certainly going to make them second guess themselves.
Well, also too, usually, you look at these quarterbacks that are getting drafted. Well, they're getting drafted high in the draft because there's a reason, because there's a deficiency in the entire team. And to, strap it on and say, okay, yeah, 21, 22-year-old kid, put this all on your back and, lead us to glory land. It's just not going to happen usually. It doesn't happen. It's just too much. I mean, you got to think it's the most complex position in the entire sport. You got to know so much and execute it perfectly. So again, when you draft high, there's going to be a lot of holes on your roster that still need to be filled.
I agree. And I would almost take that a step forward and say that there's a reasonable argument to be made that the quarterback at the NFL level is the most difficult position in all of professional sports to play. And that is in large part because you must process everything in front of you in very short periods of time. And you get a fair amount of the blame when you're the reason why you lost.
Absolutely.
And in addition to that, a disproportionate amount of the credit when you win. So it is a yin and a yang, and especially if you're the reason why you lost. So if you throw, say, pull a Jameis Winston and throw 3 picks in 5 plays or something.
3 picks, 3 touchdowns, 400 yards.
Yeah. So if you're like a Jameis Winston there, then you're going to be pointed at as a reason why you lost, because you can't throw that many picks in a game and expect to win, right? And so I agree with a lot of the fans here, which is an offensive line is incredibly important for a young quarterback.
Absolutely.
You are getting zero disagreement from me there. In fact, I've been on this show and said it multiple times that build the lines, and then honestly, at that point, then you can go out and trade a bunch of picks if you need to grab your quarterback.
Well, look at for Zach Wilson last year in New York. The New York Jets offensive line was horrific, and they spent a lot of money. They went out and they signed 2 tackles and they drafted a tackle to try to solve that problem. And, for the Raiders, Raider Nation knows that this is going to be the biggest question mark for us this year, besides our quarterback, is going to be that offensive line. It's totally reshaped. Players are changing positions. So it's going to be really interesting to see. And we're going from a power blocking scheme to a zone blocking scheme. So, yeah, that's going to be the biggest if.
Yep.
And I got a question. So who do you want to start? You want Stiddy or you want Wilson then?
It's an interesting one. I first thought it was going to be Wilson, but I think Stidham probably will beat him out.
That was my thought.
I think Stidham he's a bright guy. I think what Stidham's issue is that he processes well, he throws well, but he doesn't have the next thing, which is kind of any kind of flash. He just kind of does. You know what I mean? He just kind of just does. That's a great trait for a backup quarterback, by the way. And signing a 5-year deal for some kind of reasonable sum of money to have him as your backup, a QB2, would probably be a smart deal for an NFL team, because he's certainly a guy that I think fits that mold. The benefit that we saw from Stidham, though, is he came in for Russell Wilson last year, and there was a negligible statistical difference between Russ and Stidham, period. So that tells me that in the limited playbook, Stidham was able to excel. Now, I would love to see what a more expansive playbook looks like with Stidham at the helm, which would allow him to audible or allow protections to be more aggressively changed at the line of scrimmage to better, put the team in a better spot. So that would be a very interesting thing for me to see personally as a Broncos fan. But my hope, and this is what I'd like to see this year, is 1 or 2 games where the Broncos just beat another team with like 2 touchdowns going into the 4th at some point, and then have Bo Nix come in to help close the game out and just kind of get that additional NFL experience. So I'm not saying start. I'm saying kind of do what the Chiefs did with Mahomes a little bit. Get him in there to kind of just get his feet wet, but don't make it so that he has to be the reason, and don't make it so that he's thrown completely into the flames. And then come 2025, so next season, I think it's reasonable to then expect that Bo Nix should be our starting quarterback. And I'm fine with that. In fact, I expect that.
Well, also he's got a year of experience, with your scheme, which gives him a leg up already. But I agree. I think that would be a better way to go to start it off.
Now, I mean, unless Stidham and Wilson just, get nuked off the face of the planet and they look absolutely awful. All indications are I'm going to say similar to what we heard from Mahomes when he was with the Chiefs, which is they were a huge fan of their young rookie quarterback. They felt that he was certainly representing himself well and appears like he could really be the future of their franchise. But they wanted to have him learn behind the veteran so that he could feel comfortable when he was put under that extreme pressure that any quarterback is going to find themselves under at the NFL level. And I mean, I would argue that their approach worked.
Yeah, you might have a little shorter leash on your team, because with Mahomes, I forgot the name of the quarterback. He came from Smith, Alex Smith, from the Niners. So he was a veteran. He was a starter already. He was a high draft pick. If I recall, he was the first pick overall.
Who?
So,
Alex Smith, I think, was first overall at one point.
Yeah. So he was in a good position to learn, but everyone kind of knew Alex Smith had his limits, but his limits were pretty darn high for, at that time compared to what I think, Denver has. So I wouldn't be surprised at some point during the season if there's an injury or something like that. then I see Nick's going right in. I don't know if we're gonna Wilson. Just watching Wilson, but then again, he had a really horrific offensive line. So one never knows. And I look at it. Go back in time with Jim Plunkett. When he was on the Niners, he was just garbage. I mean, he was really bad, and he got cut. Raiders pick him up. He goes to 2 Super Bowls. I can't say he was like the best ever, but he got the job done. And so just a different environment can have that change on players. So hopefully that works out for Wilson for you.
Well, the one thing to remember is his stats were actually fairly good if all you're looking at is that top end stat lines of like yards and touchdowns and other stuff, right? Like Wilson's stats were actually fairly good. And that was in spite of offensive line challenges in New York. Now, the question was then going to be, is in a more quarterback-friendly scheme and a head coach that is proven to adapt his scheme to best fit the quarterback that's put in front of him, what will Wilson look like? What will his game look like? How will he present himself on the field? Is it going to be something that is different than what we've seen from Wilson of old? I think it will be. I think Zach Wilson is going to look much better than he has in New York. And I think that a more balanced team in front of him, behind him, is going to make a difference. The question is, can he continue to make those extra splash plays? The types of plays that Stidham knows he can't make, but tries to make up with processing power. Zach Wilson has additional arm strength and some additional tools in his tool belt that Stidham does not have. And that's cool. Everyone's a little bit different, right? Like all these different players have these different skill sets. Not everyone can run as fast as Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position. But then again, at the same flip side of the coin, not everyone can throw the ball as long and as hard as, say, a Zach Allen or Patrick Mahomes. Like everyone's got some different skill sets in their tools in their tool belt.
Sure.
And you can be successful with varied tools in your tool belt at the NFL level. The bigger thing is, are you able to avoid mistakes? Right?
Do you feel, because here's something for the Raiders, like with AFC 12 and Minshew, they run kind of the similar offense. That's what they've done. And so they are kind of similar guys. And you're right, they have different tools. But for your quarterbacks, since you got 3 of them that are going to be there, do they all kind of like fit the same mold as in the way of the style? Or is your head coach going to have to just totally drop different plays for each one of them?
I think it's going to be a matter of, if you have a menu of 12 plays with schematic looks, Stidham may be able to run 10. Wilson may be able to run, say, 10, but 2 of them that Stidham can run, Wilson can't.
Okay, so they overlap then pretty good.
And then Nick's, I think, is a bit of a blend between both. Nick's has got a little bit of mobility and can throw on the run. He's also incredibly accurate, and he processes. So it's like a blender between Wilson and Stidham, kind of as a mesh, where I think you run the huge risk, and I said this earlier, is throwing a rookie too quickly into the fire. I think is going to come back and bite you. So I just don't think it's a good idea. I think that you either keep 3 QBs on the active roster, or you at least try to keep all 3 QBs within the capacity of your team, and go from there.
Yeah, Raiders Zach Nix and Stidham fit perfectly in the short passing game. Wilson is more intermediate to long-term passing game. I agree.
Yep. And that's what I mean by different tools in your tool belt. Nix gets the ball out really quick. But the other thing to remember is Nix was also not asked to throw the deep passes in college because that wasn't the offensive scheme that he was running.
No. Kind of like Penix wasn't asked to run.
Right. And so you can't automatically assume that just because you didn't see it doesn't mean that the dude can't do it. You have to factor in whether or not the team that he was on ran that scheme. It's just as simple as that. It's the same thing when you deal with running backs with inside zone and outside zone, or offensive linemen when it comes to are they a power blocker, better suited for like a power run, passing game sort of thing, or are they maybe better suited for, say, a zone scheme? And then, of course, at that point, then you say inside or outside zone in terms of which one they might be better at. But
absolutely, that's like one of my biggest things going to the run zone scheme with Munford. He's built for the power, but I don't know if he can handle it. We're going to find out. But the Raiders got a lot of trust in him. Raider Nation wanted, somebody to be signed as a free agent or drafted to replace him. And that really never happened. Glaze, who they did take in the third round, he's not projected to like really battle him for the starting spots. So yeah, going from one scheme to another. That's why I was saying earlier, is going to be the biggest question mark on the entire squad is how this offensive line performs to give your quarterback that time to make any type of throw.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think we've seen most teams in the division seek to improve the interior of defensive lines.
Mm-hmm.
Broncos did it. Raiders did it. Chiefs have kind of gone in that direction a little bit as well.
Yeah, well, they got a really good. They got one of the best interior lines in the NFL.
Yep. And so, and then the Chargers have traditionally had good interior rush. Not the Chargers, but Harbaugh has traditionally had good interior rush. But I think that the issue there is they're just trying to work out who fits. And so I think the Chargers are going to be in a bit of an ebb and flow.
Well, Chargers, they kind of looked at it going, boy, look at all these defensive ends out there. And so, when they had a chance to get Joe Alt, which was a really good pick, to solidify. And, we talked about it on a previous show. They should swap him out, move Alt over to left, move, forgot what his name is, to the other side. I think that would be a better setup. But they got one of the best young combo tackles, in the NFL.
Yep, I agree. I actually agree with Raider Zach here. Nix and Stidham fit seamlessly into Sean's offensive system. I do agree that Wilson is a little bit more gunslinger-esque. You mentioned another quarterback like a Brett Favre. Wilson has a little bit more of that in him than he does, the meticulous, marching down the field kind of deal.
Well, he's got a stronger arm.
He does, and this is exactly what we were talking about. If I can tie a bow on this, and then we can kind of move on to another topic. This is exactly what I meant by Russell Wilson and what he did and did not do. So here's a great example with Wilson. So Wilson has a strong arm, just like Zach Allen has a strong arm, just like Patrick Mahomes has a strong arm. They can throw the ball a long way, and they can hit and are fairly accurate with that big arm too, which is fantastic. Good for them. However, if you don't learn the auxiliary skill sets, such as being able to read defenses, being able to process faster by a look and in terms of who's where and what's what, and process the secondary and tertiary triggers that should tell you kind of where coverage is going to be, who's going to be doubled, who's not. Based on this, that guy over there on the right, if I wait an extra second, should kind of be free by the time he crosses over to the left-hand side of the field, because the coverage here is grouped and it looks like it's going to the right rather than my right rather than the left. And, the best quarterbacks, I would put Peyton Manning in.
Oh, absolutely.
He's like,
way up there.
Yeah, he might be Rushmore when it comes to that kind of. And by the way,
he is.
For those who want to argue that point, I think we need to hear Urlacher and Ray Lewis talk about Peyton Manning. So we're talking.
It's one word that that the world knows. Yeah. When he says the line is Omaha. When you hear that, something's going on.
Yeah, and he would also use Omaha as a word and
decoy too,
to throw you off as a decoy. He would also use combination words to throw the other team off. Again, it was like a chess master, playing football out there. And Brady was getting much better at that, but it took him longer than Manning to pick up. Brady never got to the same level Manning was in the same period of time. Brady was always kind of a level below.
1A, 1B.
Yeah. Now, what I'm saying with that is, okay, Wilson has these extra tools. He can throw the ball harder. He can throw the ball further. He can be a little bit more accurate with that deep throw because he's got the stronger arm. So he feels more comfortable and confident throwing it that deep. Problem is, if you don't learn defensive coverages, if you don't learn how to adjust protections, and if you don't have confidence in what you're doing because of perhaps your previous employer, in terms of, what you look like on the field and all that kind of stuff, then you run the risk of, hesitating slightly before you throw the ball. Well, that ends up in a pick. Okay. Now that's a problem. Now he needs to adjust and add additional tools to his tool belt while he can, because you want to add those tools while you still have the big arm so that you become a more complete player. Russell Wilson never got to a point, and proven, in my opinion, from what we saw his last year in Denver, where he could read defenses quickly. And he also never learned how to self-assess and learn how to throw anticipatory throws. The only ball that Russell Wilson was, I call elite at, actually, is that rainbow pass. That arc, that kind of drop it in the bucket throw that he's so famous for, that's probably one of the prettiest footballs that you'll see thrown like that from any quarterback, arguably sometimes even ever. I mean, he's thrown some of those, bucket passes to, pick your receiver, and man, those are pretty. Those are just, wow, that's pretty. But if that's all you can do, and you've not developed any other elements or tools in your tool belt, you're done, because at some point you're not going to be able to make that throw because you're going to lose arm strength because you're getting older. At some point, you're not going to be able to scramble because you're getting older. And so you need to add those additional, those other tools, the ones that you need to focus on and learn, not the ones that come naturally to you, the ones that you need to learn. And if you don't learn those tools, I think we're seeing that in Russell Wilson. I think we saw that with Cam Newton in the NFL.
Yeah, once you start, once you start losing your legs, and Russell would go out, make space, and then he could throw that rainbow ball, but now he's not running like he used to. So you're not going to get those extra chances or that extra time to do that.
Yeah, and then every so often you end up with a quarterback like a Baker Mayfield, for example, who has seemingly had a very large and very bright mirror point in his direction. And he has embraced that opportunity to grow. And I think that he has turned the corner, so to speak.
Yeah.
And has made the adjustments required to adapt his game and add those additional tools in his tool belt. He kept on relying on his legs, which were a hallmark of his game in college. And he quickly found out that at the NFL level, the dude's slow.
Yeah. They're just so much bigger, faster, stronger. I mean, and you got guys like 260 pounds, 6'4", running 4.5 40s. Yeah, good luck on that.
Yeah, exactly. And Matt, I don't disagree. I do actually think that that's an underreported and an element of Lamar's game that people don't focus on, which is his pure pocket passer. The problem, though, is I think like Russ, and I think like some of these other guys that are just so athletically gifted, that they have relied on their, secret or elite element of their game. So Lamar's was speed, running the ball, being able to be elusive, that sort of thing. They've relied so heavily on it that it becomes a crutch, and it becomes something that has prevented them or hindered their ability to be forced, and I use the word force, to learn those other skills for them to be even more effective at college. And then, of course, it then gets magnified or amplified at the NFL level, where it's like, oh, dude, you really don't know how to read a defense. Man, you're really not great at sitting in the pocket and panning and scanning and throwing those anticipatory throws, or in Zach Wilson's case, which is, dude, you need to learn those touch passes in the middle of the field, because at some point you're not going to be able to throw an 80-yard pass. And you have to adapt. And I think too many of these young guys lean too heavily on their incredibly unique gifts that got them so famous in the first place. And they're not adapting themselves to have long-term success. They're relying on their gifts, which ultimately narrow their years of success at the NFL level. Whereas the best of the best, Peyton Manning's, etc., Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, I'd argue Ben Roethlisberger's probably in that area and that kind of vein as well. At some point, those physical gifts are gonna wane and fade. So you have to have something else in order to get you there.
Agreed. And I think Lamar has stepped up his game in the way of, getting better, what Matt was just talking about.
Yeah.
And you look from year one to now, you can definitely see improvement. So it's just a case of like a guy actually doing what you're talking about and getting better at those little things that they don't completely relied on from day one. But I would like to see him learn how to, actually I don't, because we play him.
Yeah.
In a way of reading a defense a little better, though.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that day he can't read a defense at all.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I'm going to start just discussing a little bit on the Chargers side of things. We are starting to hear some rumblings coming out of the Chargers facility of the C word culture and change, which is, it's very clear that Jim Harbaugh's culture there is quite a bit different. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the Harbaugh culture there with the Chargers is obviously changing and is in a different one from Staley. And I think Chargers fans are welcoming that change because they obviously want to start winning and doing better. So that's great. But the flip side to that, and this is what Denver went through last year, guys. So this is, I feel quite comfortable and confident in saying this. This is where you're going to start figuring out who you want to keep and who you do not want to keep. Because football is hard. And NFL football is even harder. And you need to make sure that you got the right dudes on the field to get you to that end goal, which is a Super Bowl, obviously. And if you don't have the right dudes on the roster, they need to get gone. And maybe they will excel and succeed with another team. It's possible. It really is. However, at some point, you got to cut bait. You got to say, look, you're not a fit with me here. You might be a fit with them over there, but you're not a fit with me here. You need to either, shape up or ship out.
Well, you're going to see that probably a lot for this first year, because Harbaugh's not like the easiest, coach. He kind of burns himself out. You look at, where he has gone. He's kind of burnt himself out everywhere he's gone. He's great for a number of years, but then it gets to be too much. So, yeah, you're probably going to see some turnover with that Chargers team this year.
The one thing that Harbaugh might have going for him in with the Chargers is, I believe, from what I've seen, that the Chargers have done a tremendous amount of self-evaluation. And you see this with who they brought in as their GM. You see this with how they've constructed their team. You see this with the willingness of signing some bigger name players and bringing in a bigger name coach, which is certainly a substantial departure from the way that the team typically operates.
Just a wee bit.
Yeah, no, but look, I jest, but I'm being serious. Like, I think we can both agree that that's a true statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that what the Chargers are now doing is they recognize that the way that they did things before was not good. And I also believe that they have self-reflected, or at least externally reflected, on what did not work for Harbaugh, and will probably put some backstops in place to prevent kind of going all the way down that same rabbit hole. Because I'm sure the Chargers franchise is hoping and certainly expecting this to be turned around in fairly short order.
You can definitely see it. He's an amazing coach. But yeah, and it's already kind of happened. DZ, that what you just said, exactly. They've already started that process, getting rid of some of their veteran players that are on the team, their leaders, and he wants to build that culture his way.
That's exactly, yeah. So this comment is true. And then you've also seen, and sorry, DZ, I do want to mention, I did see your comment earlier in the show. I do agree. I think Quentin Johnson needs to step up. And if he doesn't step up this year, I think it's a fair statement to start using that B word to refer to Quentin Johnson, and that's bust. You can't have a high pick like that at the receiver position not show out. And so if he doesn't start showing out and he starts looking like he's being overshadowed by guys that were picked well after him in the draft, that is done. Like, you're done. And then he's going to end up being that guy that bounces around to 3 or 4 different teams until I can only suspect at that point there, it's effort, right? At the NFL level, you just got to simply put in more effort. And if he's unwilling to put in that extra effort at the NFL level, he's not going to look like he did in college.
No.
And
can't do that in the NFL.
Yeah, you can't. And so, he may look great in college. And then if he doesn't put in that extra level of effort to continue to be and look great at the NFL level, he won't look great or good there at all. And, I think that the Chargers are clamoring for QJ there to, dial it from an 8 to an 11. and that's what they're wanting, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. Grew up in a military household. Yeah, you think you'd be disciplined then. Maybe you rebelled.
Right, but the question is he grew up in a military household. Cool, awesome. But where's his drive coming from? It's not that he can't operate within structure. In fact, I actually probably don't think that that's his problem. The question is, where does that extra level come from within you in order to push yourself to be better than just average? And right now, I think he is kind of hovering somewhere in that middling average block within the NFL, which is he'll be a depth piece on some roster. He'll be a dude, if he continues to play the way he is right now, that'll be picked up as a, combination special teams dude. And then eventually in a couple years, he'll get cut and he won't make it back into the NFL again because he's just not putting in the extra oomph. What you need is a dude that has the traits of QJ, but then also elevates their level of play to, here, let me put it this way. Quinn Johnson is a taller, bigger wideout, right? Because that's what Tom Telesco liked, is that taller, bigger wideout. Now, I do suspect that Herbert prefers that as well, but that's just my thought process. Now, look at a guy like Tim Patrick and compare him to Quinn Johnson. I would argue that you take Tim Patrick tomorrow over Quinn Johnson.
Based on what they've done, yes.
Yeah. So that's my point. One was selected super early, one was not. They're basically in a similar mold in terms of size and whatnot. And I'm telling you, you're going to take Tim Patrick every day of the week over Quinn Johnson right now, unless Quinn Johnson kind of, sparks that flame and starts to, show out like he is a first round pick.
Well, we're going to find out. See if, being under Harbaugh changes his mindset.
I agree. I agree. And all reports are coming from every single person from Broncos in Broncos country there. Tim Patrick is looking on fire, which is a good thing for me, not such a good thing for everybody else. So that's a great thing there. So looking ahead to what we're going to be covering off in coming shows, guys, we are going to continue our journey down the AFC North. We are going to bring on some additional guests to discuss the AFC North teams and our games against them. I still maintain that I believe that is going to be our division's toughest division that we play against. I believe that they are built differently, and they are built as a real challenge to the way that we are built. Like there's a kind of a butting of heads, if you will, in terms of how our divisions are built. And I think that they have a physicality to them that is unique to the AFC North, and it's unilateral. All teams in the AFC North are built that way. So I'd also throw Detroit in that kind of general kind of blender as well, just because they're kind of built physically as well, based on the weather that they often play in, as well. So we are going to continue that group there. We're going to bring in a guest to talk about the Ravens, hopefully the Bengals, and the Steelers. And next week, we are expecting the full complement of all four folks here on the show. Alex will be back, and Robert will be back as well. I did get a message from Robert, guys. He sends his apologies. His commitment ahead of the show went longer than it should have. And traffic is a thing because, well, he's in California. And well, that's a thing. So
it is a thing.
Yeah. So anyways, Robert, I hope you're well, and hope the traffic isn't too bad. But
yeah, Robert, I hope you're listening so you can rebuttal.
Yeah.
Rebuttal,
Yeah. Yeah. And then the one question I am going to have for everyone here, we have quite a number of folks joining us live. I want those likes down below each of those videos. Go ahead and click that like button. If you're watching over on the Raiders side, come over to the Broncos channel, the MHRT Network. You can find the link down below in the description. Click that like button to help bolster all of these channels and get more viewers just like you into the show. And if there's any questions that you have for Jack and myself prior to us wrapping up for today, go ahead and leave those in the chat, and we will get those answered. Hopefully next week, we're going to get right back into either a theme or back to the AFC North series that we were starting on last week with the Browns. Great show with the Browns. I thought the guy brought some great information. Jeff has got a tremendous amount of information there with regards to his Cleveland Browns. They are going to be a tough team, whether we like to admit it or not. Watson, I think a lot of people don't realize that despite his legal troubles, statistically speaking, was looking quite good prior to his injury. And I think it is reasonable to expect that given his hiatus in the years prior and a look ahead and probably regret of how his years have gone thus far since going to Cleveland, he's going to want to prove himself. So I do expect him to kind of come up with a bit of a lighting of the fire, so to speak, in terms of getting his play back up to snuff, which I do expect him to do in short order. And I mean, just all around our opponents that we're playing this year at the division, I think we're going to be in for. There's going to be some slugfests of games, and as long as
good football, that's for sure.
Yeah, I do agree. So, anyways, with that in mind, guys, I think we're going to wrap up the show there and get you all back to your families and doing something else and all that good stuff. If there's any other questions, leave it below in the comments once the video closes out here, and we'll do our best to answer them after the show. If you don't follow us on X or Twitter, I have my handle down below. You can go ahead and reach out in the comments of the show, or just generally speaking, and I'll fire any questions you may have over to Jack there. And we'll see you next week, guys. And until next week, where the West Side is the best side. Peace.
Peace. Salute, nation.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Pimples been asking for me on the road from the west to the east. Way up, I might never come down, cause the coast racking up the flight miles. So high, I might never come down, so what, this is my lifestyle. Wait a minute, work hard for the car.